I'm super thankful and grateful to be with you guys this morning. My name is Luis. I'm an intern and a future church planner here at Calvary Chapel, Rosarito, and this is today's good news. Today we'll be looking at Proverbs 120, but first, there's this young lady sitting in the mall parking lot. She's crying, she's bawling, she just lost $200. A guy walking by stops and asks her, "Honey, why are you crying?" She says, "I just lost $200. Well, this guy who had just found $200 reaches in his pocket, pulls out $20, gives them to her and says, "When I'm blessed, I always bless the next." So Proverbs 120, it reads like this: Wisdom cries out loud in the streets, and in the marketplace she raises her voice. Wisdom cries in the streets out loud. In other words, she shouts. She doesn't avoid being heard, but is audible, as for both you and me to hear. She hasn't excluded anybody. She desires to be heard. In the marketplace, she raises her voice. So here we have King Solomon describing wisdom as a shout or a cry, where that is loud in the streets and in the marketplace. So let's think about this. Healthy Jerusalem, 28 generations before Jesus Christ, the greatest kingdom of its time. And King David has just left the throne to young Solomon. Remind you, mighty King David, a man after God's own heart. Now, young Solomon does something very interesting at the beginning of his reign. He follows in the footsteps of his father. He seeks the Lord. David's reign is loud in the ear of Solomon, as well as to the people of Israel. Just like Jesus Christ's cross and his work on the cross is loud for us. Now, this world is full of attractive sounds, like the car that comes by in the morning screaming tamales, chiles con raja, chile verde, chile rojo. You guys know what I'm talking about. Or how about the sound of who doesn't like money? Now, or how about the sound of church bells? When you hear the church bells in the morning before service, if that's not wisdom, then I don't know what is. 1 Kings 3:28 reads like this. And as Israel heard the judgment, and all Israel heard the judgment that the king had rendered, and they stood in awe of the king, because they perceived that the wisdom of God was in him to do justice. So this comes at the end of the story of the two prostitutes fighting for a baby. You guys know the story. Solomon asked for a sword. He's about to cut the baby in half, when the real mother stops Solomon and says, "No, let her have the baby." So in this story, wisdom brings love to the forefront. As God brought forth Jesus on the cross, and he said in John 3:16, "For God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten son." Not only does wisdom bring love to the forefront, but it also shows us sacrifice. So brothers and sisters, if wisdom is shouting, the wise will hear. Are you listening this morning? Are you eager to hear the will of our righteous judge? Giving your ear to the world is dangerous. There is no peace, and there's far less love. So to perceive is to understand. And we understand that 1 and 1 is 2, and that's great. But it also means to realize, to come to a realization. This verse in 1 Kings tells us that the people perceived Solomon's wisdom was from God. Far more greater is that we realize, that we come to an understanding that our God cries out for us. Let's take a look at this verse again. Proverbs 120, it reads like this: Wisdom cries out loud in the streets, and in the marketplace she raises her voice. Read it one more time. Wisdom cries out loud in the streets, and in the marketplace she raises her voice. So the cross for 2,000 years has been at work. Today we can choose to hear and be wise and share as living testimonies and the fruitfulness and the abundance of the Spirit, as the streets of Israel were flourishing at the time during Solomon's reign. And we could do the same in the kingdom of Jesus, be fruitful and flourish. So, wisdom of God, Jesus, cries out loud for you and me to hear. Listen. And this is today's good news.